to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Did somebody just...
Hi, it's Andrew from Strategic Telemetry.
Oh, great, okay. Hi, Andrew. This is Colleen. We just had the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll go through roll call. Vice Chair Freeman.
Here.
Commissioner Callan.
Here.
Commissioner McNulty. Here. Commissioner Sturt.
Here.
We have a quorum. Other participants in today's meeting include our Executive Director, Ray Bladine, our Deputy Executive Director, Christina Gomez, Legal Counsel, Joe Canefield and Mary O'Grady. I know our court reporter, Marty Herder's there, and any staff there, other staff?
Not in the room with us.
Okay, and Andrew Dreschler from Strategic Telemetry is on the line. Anybody else that I've missed?
No.
Okay. So let me, the agenda, the call to order, we're done. Number 2, discussion and possible action regarding the burglary of September 16, 2013 at the Evans House. The Commission may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public for the purpose of obtaining legal advice. So I'll just tee this up. Sometime between 3 p.m. Friday the 13th of September and Monday morning the 16th at 7:50 in the morning, the Evans House, where the IRC offices are, was broken into. A number of laptops were taken, including the one issued to me, which I used for IRC purposes. Currently, the investigation into this burglary is being handled by the Major Crimes Division in the General Investigation Unit at the Arizona Department of Public Safety. And I tried to have the lead investigator come today and present the latest. That would have been my preference. But I was told that because this is still an active investigation, they can't present in a public meeting. So what happened instead is Ray, Christina, and I had a meeting with the lead investigator, and he gave us a rundown of kind of what happened, which you have in the police report that was sent out to everybody, and then kind of gave us some update of what's happened since then. And
Marty says he can't hear with the echo.
Okay, I'll turn it down.
you know, there are
You
some
have to have
troubling details associated with the whole thing, and it's unfortunate. Because it's an active investigation, I can't really talk a lot about the different things that they've learned, but they're going to continue to follow up, and as long as leads keep coming in, they will consider it an active investigation. And so I know that I intend to continue to follow up, and I'm sure staff will as well. And that's really kind of the story. I don't know if Ray, do you want to add anything from our meeting?
Madam Chair, I think you really covered it. I do believe that listening to the sergeant in charge that they are going to follow up until they can't follow, they don't have any more leads to follow up on. So I think you covered it.
Yeah, I wish I could say, I didn't ask the sergeant this if there was a reward for any additional information, but if anybody has any details, if they learn anything, definitely pass them along to DPS. Any questions from commissioners about or comments about the break-in?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
You used the word troubling. Could you explore that, please?
Unfortunately, I can't.
Then why did you use the word?
Because there are troubling details that they are personally troubling to me. I don't know if they would be to you or to Commissioner Callan or anybody else on the commission, but they were to me.
Does that leave an open thought to anybody listening to this conversation that, or in the audience that might want to interpret that in a way that could also be considered troubling?
I don't know how anyone else wants to interpret it. That's my interpretation, and I'm the one who had the meeting, and Ray and Christina were there. They may not have found it troubling. So,
well, how did the break-in take place? Was it a break-in, or was it an error in judgment?
First I requested that the sergeant, I don't know his official title, come to the meeting, as I said, and actually brief everybody in public. And then we were notified by DPS that that's not possible because it's an active investigation. And so they said they could, though, talk to me or to Ray. So both of us got on the, had the meeting with him, and Christina was there too. And that's how it happened.
So was it a breaking and entering, or was it an error in judgment?
I don't understand your question.
Well, I'm trying to. Is the police report public knowledge?
Oh yeah, the police report is public, right? Mary and Joe.
Yes, it is. In fact, the copy we got from the press.
So do you want to explain to the audience what had happened?
Well, it's in our packet, isn't it? I think it's part of what was submitted for this meeting, so it's probably public record at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, it's Scott Freeman.
Mr. Freeman?
What steps have we undertaken to make sure the Evans house is secure and safe for everyone who works here?
That's an excellent question. Mr. Bladine, I'm going to ask you to answer that.
Part of the, let me go back. The entry into the building was made through an unlocked window. And what we have found is that even after the police came and had secured the building, there was an unlocked window. These are the old casement type windows that slide up and down, and if the top window isn't all the way up, then you can't lock the bottom window to it. So it's very easy to think a window's locked when it isn't. Up until the break-in, we'd had a lot of contact with the General Facilities Office of the state about the fact the alarm would work, not work, would not connect. Anna had a number of calls with the alarm people. After the break-in, Bill Hernandez, who's a deputy director in the Department of Administration, took it upon himself to directly work with us to make sure that an alarm system that properly functioned would be installed. They replaced, as I understand it, the main board for the alarm system. They came out, fixed door locks, and at this time, from everything we can tell, the alarm system does work and it does ring to DPS either at the Capitol Police Building or DPS directly. I'm not sure which one of those. We did have an incident here last week where someone was hit out in the street. We got rather concerned since it didn't seem anybody was coming to help the gentleman, so we used our panic button and it worked. So we know that our panic button works, so we assume our alarm is working. It's kind of closing the barn door after the horses left, but it is the best we can do, and right now we do think we've got the building secure. Part of the problem, of course, that we can't do much about is its location, and we do have a lot of transients that hang around the building, will come up on the porch, and on the weekend it's kind of a tough place to be. We also try to make sure that we don't leave at night one person here or during the day. Try to make sure that our staffing is so that there's at least 2 people here. And I think at this point, unless Christina can think of anything, that's pretty much what we've done to make sure the building's secured and to protect the staff.
Any other comments or questions?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Just a comment to Mr. Bladine. Thank you very much. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, was the more extrapolated discussion about what had happened and why. And it wasn't a lack of judgment. It was that this was a window problem that we didn't, that they, as it says, as it's described in the police report, it makes it sound like we left a window open. And what we had was actually not a lack of judgment or leaving a window open. It was a problem that some folks decided to take advantage of. So thank you, Mr. Bladine.
You're welcome, Commissioner Sturts.
Any other comments or questions on the break-in? Okay, I just have one, and that's that I want to acknowledge Buck Force, formerly known as our Chief Technology Officer. I don't know if Buck's there today, but anyway, he's currently on contract to help the commission still with its IT needs. And I understand he was pretty instrumental in getting the commission back up and running after the break-in, and I just want to thank him for his help. So that concludes agenda item 2. Number 3, discussion and possible action on leach discovery requests, including possible executive session transcript release. We've got another possible executive session that could happen with the next agenda item too. And we probably would just want to go in once. I don't know how many members of the public we have there today. Anybody want to let me know?
We have 3 members of the press here, Jeremy Duda, Mary Jo Pitzel, and Howie Fisher, and that is our audience.
Okay. Yeah, so it'd probably be good to have just one executive session if we could. Mary and Joe, did you have any thoughts on how to proceed? Do you want to just go in order, or do you want to try to lump these together so that we do it in one executive session?
Madam Chair, this is Joe Canefield. The one suggestion that we would have as council is if Ray and Christina could give at least a portion of their executive director's report that deals with the budget prior to our discussion on agenda items 3 and 4. That way the public would have the benefit of that information before we went into executive session. It would also be helpful for those agenda items.
So take number 4 now, and then 3, and then executive session.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, that's correct. It would be agenda item 4 ahead of agenda item 3.
Okay. Let's do discussion and possible action then on regarding obtaining the necessary appropriation to fund litigation regarding the defense of the maps. The commission may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public for the purpose of obtaining legal advice and providing direction to counsel. So everyone should have gotten a pretty detailed memo that Ray and Christina put together, not only on our budget, but on just kind of the subject is supplemental appropriation required, dated October 18th, a 4-page memo. And then I think today they also kind of sent out a budget outline that's a 1-pager that's pretty helpful to kind of just get a snapshot of where things are as of today.
Madam Chair, would you like me to briefly summarize the report and highlight those parts of it that seem most important?
That'd be great. Thanks, Mr. Bladine.
I think in presenting this report, our plan would be to really break it into three parts. I'll talk about some of the history getting up to our current situation with regard to what staff has done. Then I'll ask Christina to go over the details of how we came up with the revised budget that's in your packet, which is summarized by the one-sheet handout that we just completed, and then ask Joe Canfield to talk about the status of litigation, and then finally have just a summary and open it up for discussion of alternatives with the commission. With that, I think everyone's aware that there's been an ongoing struggle for funds for the commission since it was created. We've had many supplemental requests. We've had many times that we've had to go back to the legislature for assistance. Originally, the Department of Administration had recommended a $10.2 million appropriation for the life of the commission. The initial year, that was reduced to $500,000 for fiscal 11 and $3 million for fiscal 12. To date, we've been appropriated $7,900,000. So I just would point out that we're not far off of what was thought to be a reasonable appropriation back when the commission started. The last commission spent about $9.4 million. For inflation, it wouldn't appear that we're extremely outside of what would be a reasonable amount for the commission to be spending. This year we requested $2.26 million based upon the estimated work that would be done in defending the maps. That's the primary activity that the commission's involved in. We received an appropriation of $1,115,000. The governor had recommended 1.4. As you all are aware, the legislature had a very tumultuous session last year. At one point, we heard the Senate was going to recommend an appropriation of $800,000. We got in contact with Senate leadership and told them $800,000 probably wouldn't get us out of the summer. And they came back with 1.1. We told them based on past experience, it would be lucky we would make it to when they got into session. We tried to work to get a minimum of the 1.4 the governor recommended, but frankly, in the last days of the legislative session, I don't think we were the highest priority for them to be working on. On August 22nd, when we realized that we really were not going to be able to make it to the end of the fiscal year, we sent a letter to John Arnold, who's the head of the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, telling him that we need a $1.25 million supplemental. We also then went and met with Senator Biggs and Senate President Biggs and his staff and talked to him about the possibility of a special session and what our financial situation was. He basically indicated that he didn't see that a special session would be feasible, requested we see what we could do to make it to January when the legislature would be in session, and at that time a supplemental appropriation could be made. He also acknowledged that he was fully aware of the constitutional requirement that the legislature must provide adequate funds, and reminded us that in the past they have provided supplemental appropriations when we have requested them. He also suggested we hold off on paying some of the attorney bills but keep the litigation moving. Following that, we informed House Speaker Tobin of the same situation. He asked us to meet with his staff. We did meet with Speaker Tobin's staff, and they also indicated a special session did not seem likely, and tried to go as long as we could to get to January when the legislature was back in session. At the same time, we asked the Office of Strategic Planning and Budget to reallot our fourth quarter funding to the current quarter. As you recall, in the past several years, we've had allotments that break out what we can spend by quarters. We've had discussion in the past as to whether that should apply to us or not when we have a lump sum appropriation, and up until this year, that the fact that we had allotments was sticking. However, they had indicated they may be willing to do that, but under their understanding of, or our budget analyst's understanding, we could not transfer salaries and related operating costs that are related to salaries to any other category. So that door at that point was closed to us. Then we worked with the Joint Legislative Budget Committee to provide financial projections in the format requested and answered their questions about how we got our estimates and provided them detail. We also talked to JLBC about transferring salary and other costs to fund outside consulting and legal. They believed that we should be able to do so since we had a lump sum appropriation. Recently, the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting confirmed in writing that we could transfer funds. So I want to mention that part of what Christina will present, we have proposed taking what funding we can from activity past for legal activity up until January, and for other operating costs to March, anything but that we've transferred forward to be used to pay legal bills as much as we can between now and January. We also met with the state controller to discuss what he might think we could do. He reaffirmed that without an appropriation he can't pay bills. So at that point we asked our attorneys to, one, review all of our budget estimates for timing as to, given the most recent information from court cases, is our timing still right in terms of the monthly expenditures, and second, to take what action they could to defer all of the possible costs that could be deferred until after January. We really, at the same time, notified all the attorneys that we had that they needed to stop work due to a lack of appropriation, that state law requires agencies to stay within the current appropriation, and inform them that if they were to do any other work, they would be doing that at their own risk. That then, taking those actions, the delaying of legal work costs, which we're calling a lockdown approach of trying to minimize what we need to do without jeopardizing our defense of the maps, resulted in reduced legal costs for the last 2 months. And that helped provide us an additional amount of money that could help get us to the possibility of January. As I mentioned, we transferred all of the available funding that we thought reasonable to transfer to professional and outside legal services, and maintained budgetary salary and operating costs to March. I guess I could say that as we get closer to March and we see the possibility of a supplemental activity happening in January, February, some more of those funds could be transferred. But in the past, March seemed to be about the time we actually got action. I know we're not the highest priority of the legislature when they come back in session, so it's hard to know if they really could meet a January deadline. The spreadsheet that Christina will present also presumes no significant unexpected legal costs, that there wouldn't be a decision on Harris, and that we would be able to maintain this reduced level of activity. All of those things, of course, or those activities in particular, are outside our ability to control, so I think it's sketchy as to whether or not we can make it to January. It could be possible, but it's not necessarily something that I can say, yeah, we will. I'd like to ask Christina to just run over how we developed our estimates, because I think it's important for everybody to know the kinds of things we've done to try to get to January, and the assumptions behind that. And then when Christina's done, if Joe could just summarize the court cases, and then I'll be glad to kind of make a conclusion and open it up for the chair to have discussion. So with that, Christina, would you like to go ahead and present the budget findings?
Sure. Madam Chair, Commission members, if I can have you all look at Exhibit 3 along with the budget outline, which is in a blue table. Now, this format is the same format that we used in January of 2013 when JLBC requested additional information regarding our first supplemental request last legislative session. So they asked us to go ahead and to continue using this format and to revise our estimates for fiscal year 14. So we're going to start off in the orange columns. It's fiscal year 2014 actuals, July through September. Now, first of all, our appropriation is $1,115,100. If you take the columns from July through September, that'll give you a sum of $518,204. If you subtract that sum from our starting appropriation, that'll leave us with a remaining balance of $596,896. Next is the gray column, which is October. And the reason why this is separate is because these are pretty firm estimates. However, they're not final yet. They won't be final until November 1st. So if you sum up the October column, that's $111,649. If you subtract that from the remaining balance above of the $596,896, we're left with a remaining balance of $485,247. Next, if we go ahead and we sum up the November estimates for, if we go ahead and sum up the November and December estimates, that's a total of $289,200. Once again, we would subtract that from the remaining balance above, and that would leave us with a new balance of $196,047. Next, we went ahead and we summed up salaries and other operating expenses for January through March. That's a total of $99,500. Once again, you would subtract that from the previous remaining balance, and that would leave us a balance of $96,547. And finally, if we sum the column that says professional and outside services, January through March, that's a sum of $37,500. Once again, if you subtract that from the previous remaining balance, that would leave us roughly $59,047. The reason why we did this was because, as you've seen from the reading material, we are complying with ARS 1-254. So we are working within our appropriation that has been allotted for this fiscal year 14. This approach right here may work if we continue with the lockdown approach until until January. Now, if I can go ahead and have you look at the legal services for November and December, you'll notice that if you add up the legal services in November, that's exactly $100,000. And in December, that's $100,000 as well. So in November, in October right now, currently, we have budgeted $100,000 for legal services. Those bills will actually be billed to us in November. And legal services done in next month in November will be billed in December. So that's why we're able to cover those expenses for now. However, in the month of December, we have roughly $59,000 for legal activity, which would be billed in January. And also, the reason why we left money, and Ray mentioned this as well, is the reason why we left money for salaries and other operating expenses in January and March is because we need money to go and approach the legislature for a supplemental. So we need to have available funds to pay someone, Ray, to go down and to try to seek a supplemental. And also, we do need money to keep our phones going and to keep the regular operations of this office going. If we don't have money, then we have to close down shop. And furthermore, for professional and outside services, we also need money to be able to pay for our court reporter whenever we do have our meetings. We need money to pay for our IT services, and we also need to have some funds available to pay our mapping consultant as well. And I believe that covers the budget for now.
Well, thank you, Ms. Gomez, and for all the work you did to pull all this stuff together. We really appreciate it. I'm curious to know, are we still, does Clark Partridge, the state comptroller, still, monthly check in on us and do a review of all of our expenditures?
Yes, yes, we did get a letter yesterday, perhaps, that, pardon me? This past week, we got a letter indicating they've reviewed our expenditures and didn't find anything that was inappropriate or improper.
Yeah, well, I have in front of me the letter. I don't have that one, but I have the September 12th one that he sent to the Honorable Don Shooter and the Honorable John Kavanaugh at the Senate Appropriations Committee and House Appropriations Committee, respectively. And I've seen a lot of these. Every month we get one, and it says, during the course of our review of the expenditures, no matters came to our attention that appeared to be either unlawful or unnecessary. And I also want to state for the record, in that letter, it says all expenditure data for the Commission is available on the State of Arizona Transparency website, which is openbooks. This says .az.gov, so it's openbooks, plural, .az.gov. And, it's no surprise when you hear someone like Christina present all this information to us that, we're getting these good checkups every month. I think they've done a pretty stupendous job of keeping us informed and also everyone else informed. So it's certainly not easy, and it's the 59,000 that is showing up now as the bottom line that's remaining. I guess I'll be interested to hear what folks have to say about what our alternatives are. I know you guys have kept a great record also of your attempts to engage in good faith with a lot of folks in the legislature, and so far there's no appropriation forthcoming.
Madam Chair, would you like to, before we go on to a discussion of this, let Joe talk about the status of the current cases?
Is that this agenda item? Let me.
It's a part of our report just to give the status.
Okay, yeah, the exhibit. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, we can.
Then we can come. Then, if you'd like, I can summarize, and we can come back to talking about the alternatives and what the commission would like to have us do.
Sure. Sounds good.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'll briefly go through the status of the three lawsuits. The first lawsuit I'll discuss is Harris versus the Redistricting Commission, and this is the summary is set forth in the materials. It's Exhibit 2. I believe that was also made available to the public. The Harris lawsuit, as you recall, is the federal district court lawsuit challenging the population deviations in the legislative map as being unconstitutional, allegedly because of partisan bias. we had an expedited trial in March. They ended it at the end on March 29th. There was some post-trial briefing after that, and then the court took the matter under advisement. At some point over the summer, the court asked us for additional briefing as a result of the United States Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder, which is the decision that struck down the coverage formula under the Voting Rights Act, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which was done. So at this point, we are still waiting for the court's decision, and as a result of that, we have not incurred many legal fees, if any at all, while we wait to hear from the court. That of course, could change as soon as the court opinion comes out, and we could expect that any day. Of course, we've been saying that for some time, so it's hard to predict when a court's going to rule. Next case is the Leach versus Redistricting Commission case. This is the case that was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court. This suit challenges the congressional lines based on various state constitutional theories, which are all set forth in the summary, which I won't go through unless you'd like me to. We moved to dismiss several of those claims. Three of the claims in the original complaint were dismissed. The plaintiffs filed an amended complaint resurrecting two of the dismissed claims. We are now, on August 19th, we had moved to dismiss the individual commissioners in their official capacities, and that motion was granted. And now we are in the process of discovery. The plaintiffs have served a number of discovery requests asking for various documents that we've been gathering, and we are moving that process along. After the discovery is complete, we anticipate that there would likely be summary judgment briefing, but at this point in time, no trial date has been scheduled in the case. The last case that's ongoing is this Arizona State Legislature versus the Redistricting Commission case. You may recall this is the lawsuit brought in federal court in front of a three-judge panel that claims that the provision in Proposition 106 that creates the commission in the Arizona Constitution violates the election clause to the extent that it removes the authority to draw the congressional maps from the Arizona legislature. The provision in the United States Constitution that the legislature cites is what we call the election clause, and as I mentioned, the matter's pending before a three-judge panel. We long ago filed a motion to dismiss that was responded to by the legislature. We replied, that briefing was complete, and the court hasn't set oral argument or obviously decided that motion. Recently, on September 20th, the legislature moved for a preliminary injunction of the law, which is essentially is a motion asking for the court to stop the law from going into effect or continuing in effect until the court can resolve the merits of the case. We have responded to that motion, which I believe we filed last Friday. The legislature will have another week or so to reply to that motion, and then we anticipate at some point that the court will schedule oral argument, likely on both the commission's motion to dismiss and the preliminary injunction motion. And I should note that in a preliminary injunction motion, the first factor that you have to argue is likelihood of success on the merits. So the issue of whether the United States Constitution preempts the state of Arizona and the citizens from empowering this commission to draw congressional lines was briefed both in the motion to dismiss and the motion for preliminary injunction, but it was essentially the same legal arguments, both in terms of the legislature's theories and the defense offered by the commission. So with that, we would recommend as council that in light of the budget situation that the commission go into executive session to receive legal advice on that situation, and also we'd be happy to answer questions in open session about the case status or any other appropriate questions you might have for us.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Canfield. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
This
Matt?
is Linda. I have a question for Mr. Canfield. Given that the legislature is suing us, have we talked to them about putting their lawsuit on hold, given that they have been unable to address the appropriations issue?
Madam Chair, Commissioner McNulty, yes, we have talked to counsel for the legislature. They are very much aware of the commission's budget situation, and the message we got back was that they want to keep the case moving forward, but also referenced the conversations that the legislative leadership has had with Ray and Christina about working to accommodate the commission and get the commission a supplemental appropriation, but at the same time noting that that likely won't happen until the legislature goes back into session in January.
Other questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Sturts?
this is for Mr. Bladeen and Ms. Gomez. In looking at the contemplation for what your discussion would be with the state legislature when they come back into session the second Monday of January, it looks like, based on your budget projections versus how you've been able to reallocate in the document that you distributed today, that you've got about $300,000 that you're deferring from what your anticipated expense was projected for October, November, and December. Is that number about right?
Are you pulling it off? I guess I'd have to look at the table, but what we did was, I think most of the deferred legal costs went into the January estimate. We moved them over, saying that, okay, they haven't gone away, they've just been delayed. Glancing at it, it looks like you're probably in the ballpark of the $300,000.
Okay. So, in your estimation, in your conversations with leadership in the House and Senate, did you feel that you were comfortable that they were going to wait until the beginning of the January session to bring up your budget so that you could have it refunded?
I think that in the discussions, I think, Commissioner Sturts, I can answer it this way. Both the House and Senate leadership acknowledge there's a constitutional responsibility to provide adequate funding for the commission, and they have always indicated they'll provide the funding. But they have said that they did not see a special session possible, but that they would be willing to take this up early in January. So all I can say is that they have in the past followed up and provided the appropriation, sometimes not as quickly as we want or as large as we want, but they have followed through to keep us having minimum funding.
And Madam Chair, as a follow-up to Commissioner McNulty's comment, that it probably would behoove the legislature in an effort to not throw any gas on a spark regarding the lawsuits, that the perception of the legislature not filing or not funding the opposition of a lawsuit that they've placed on the commission would not be good politics or good press. That they would take that would be a method to utilize so they could hear this and get this funded out of their first actions in the second week of January. Would that ring true, Mr. Bladeen?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sturts, I would think that that's a possibility, but I honestly can't say what the legislature is going to do, and I fully believe that what the leadership told us is their intent, but I also know that they also have things thrown at them at the start of the year that can, in their mind, be things they have to meet before us. But I think your theory's a plausible one.
Madam Chair, it's Scott Freeman. I just want to sort of summarize the status again of the three lawsuits. So with the legislature's lawsuit against the commission, basically all we're looking to receive now is a reply brief from the legislature, and then we're sitting and waiting for a hearing on the pending motions, which could be set, I wouldn't think, I guess it's possible it could be set in December, but we're probably looking at sometime next year. Do you agree with that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, I think that's accurate. The only thing I'd mention is that the legislature wants quick resolution, and the motion to dismiss briefing was completed a year ago, and one of the reasons, and they had been trying to get the court's attention to resolve the matter. I think the preliminary injunction suggests that they feel that this needs to be resolved sooner rather than later, or else it may not impact the 2014 election cycle as they desire. So I say you're right that we could push off the work if they were willing to do so, but my guess would be that they will want quicker resolution.
Did they ask for an expedited hearing date, or we're just waiting to hear from the three-judge panel at this point?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, no, they haven't asked for any kind of expedited consideration. So we'll have our reply brief due, and then I suppose they could ask at that point.
But essentially, all that's been briefed. We're just waiting on a hearing. If there's a hearing, there'll be an oral argument, and we should be equipped to deal with that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, yes.
Okay, so then next we go to the Harris case. Post-trial briefing is completed. We're just sitting back waiting for a decision. If the commission should prevail and we get this decision within the next month, there's nothing for us to do except to sit back and wait to see if the plaintiffs appeal, correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, I believe that's correct if we prevail. Mary, might add anything to that?
Okay, so, and even if they were to appeal, the commission really wouldn't have to do anything in that case probably until the first part of next year, the way that works. Is that fair?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, it depends when we get the decision, I suppose, but yes, it's very possible that if every week that goes by that we don't have the decision pushes off the legal work in the case.
They've got a certain amount of time to file a notice of appeal, and there would be a briefing schedule, and they would go first, and we would go second. So we're probably not doing anything until sometime the first quarter next year at the earliest, correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, that's a likely scenario.
Okay. So then we have the Leach case, which is pending in state court. We're in the middle of discovery. The commission has responded to written discovery requests. I understand there may be some supplemental responses going out, but I'm not aware of any communications from the plaintiffs that they're dissatisfied with the discovery responses, they're going to move to compel, or they're going to notice anyone's deposition. I'm just not aware of anything else going on in that case.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, yes, I think that's an accurate characterization of the status of discovery. We have communicated to counsel for the plaintiffs about the budget situation, and we have asked them to consider working with us to address the situation, to keep our costs down, to keep costs for the individual commissioner counsel down. That could be done through possibly agreeing to stay. But you're right, there hasn't been any motions filed by the plaintiffs with respect to discovery at this point. But we are having to incur cost gathering the discovery. There's a significant amount of documents that they have requested. It takes a lot of legal time, as you know, going through those documents. And so that's the current status.
I know that for sure, and I know things can change as well. But at least right now, there's not a whole lot going on in the three cases. And at least it strikes me, and I'm open to be educated on this, but there's a shot at least we could get it into January here.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, yeah, I think that's possible, and that's as a result of the good fiscal management of the commission staff, as well as the lawyers doing their best to keep costs down, and somewhat fortuitous timing in terms of the case status. So yeah, there is certainly a possibility. The problem would be is if something comes up in litigation, there could be some motion filed or a decision, anything that could require a significant amount of legal work on a very short amount of time. That's really the underlying issue here.
Yeah, and I understand that too. And then in Leach, the Leach case in state court, do we have a scheduling order in place? And if we do, when is the discovery cutoff? When's the next deadline of any significance?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, no, we do not have any hard deadlines. We're working obviously to accommodate the opposing counsel discovery request in accordance with the rules of civil procedure.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Linda. I'd like to hear a little discussion, and this may be from council, about the statute that precludes us from incurring costs if they haven't been appropriated, and whether who it would be to enforce that, and whether, you know, what's the likelihood of that becoming an issue if what we're trying to do is just have a bridge to January.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McNulty, what we would, as council, would advise is that we have that conversation in executive session because it does involve legal advice in terms of the commission's rights and potential legal action with respect to the commission's resources. So, and perhaps after we provide you advice, when you come out of session, you can direct us or discuss the matter, but not until you've received our advice.
Joe, this is Colleen, I'm having a hard time hearing you. You're cutting out kind of.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'll try to talk directly into the microphone. My response to Commissioner McNulty was suggesting that the Commission consider going into executive session to receive advice on the issue involving the Commission's resources and the legal rights of the Commission should the appropriation be exhausted prior to a supplemental appropriation being passed by the legislature. And then after you receive our advice, then in open session you can deliberate as appropriate.
Madam Chair, it's Scott Freeman.
Mr. Freeman?
Council, if the commission were to file an action as suggested in the document, it was Exhibit 2, I think, to the packet, would it be taking the same position the commission did 10 years ago when it filed a special action? Same arguments, same legal position?
Well, Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, those are issues we'd like to give you advice. I mean, obviously, if the commission would like to receive that advice in open session, we will accommodate, but our recommendation is that in terms of legal strategy, legal theories, arguments made by the last commission versus what this commission decides to do would be legal issues we would suggest at least we have an opportunity to advise you on as council, and then we can.
Okay, fair enough, but the last commission's position, I think, was that really the legislature and the governor had nothing to do with it. It was a lawsuit brought against the treasurer and the DOA, I believe, arguing that the commission has independent constitutional authority to basically have unfettered access to the public fisc, in essence, and should be appropriated directly from those entities, whatever money it believed it needed to carry out its function.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, yeah, I believe that is correct. It was a special action, as I recall, filed at the Arizona Supreme Court when the last commission had exhausted its appropriation and no supplemental appropriation was forthcoming. But as I also recall, Mary may remember better than I, that the issue was never addressed by the court because the legislature did provide a supplemental appropriation and mooted the question. But as I recall, and I have the lawsuit saved on my iPad somewhere, I could pull it up, but it was a special action brought against the treasurer, the director of the Department of Administration, who both obviously have a role with respect to the resources of the state, and on the theory that under the Arizona Constitution, the provisions governing this commission, that the commission must be provided the resources it needs to do its work, and that without an appropriation from the legislature, or in the absence of an appropriation, the commission has standing under the Arizona Constitution to bring a legal action regarding the sufficiency of its resources in what really amounted to what you could call a constitutional appropriation of sorts. But so these are obviously issues. We know what the counsel for the last commission, what their position was, what their legal theories were. Perhaps the theories we would advise on may or be the same, may not be the same, may have evolved in light of other more recent precedent, those kinds of things. But those are the kinds of things we think the commission would be well advised to have that discussion as council in executive session.
I'm sorry, this is Colleen again. There's kind of a weird echo thing happening. I don't know where it's coming from, if others that are on the line hear it as well, but.
Colleen, I think it's the AC unit snapped on here, and it's making a little bit of a noise.
Thank you.
And Joe's mic is really problematic.
Yeah, I agree.
Madam Chair, members.
Jinx, I think I heard Joe's first. Mr.
Go, Joe.
Canfield and Mr. Sturts.
Oh, Madam Chair, I was just apologizing. I'm doing my best to talk right into the microphone, but there may be an issue here for everyone on the phone, so I apologize if you can't hear me.
Thanks. Mr. Sturts?
Okay. Let me see if I can do a recap. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I just heard from Commissioner Freeman going through this with Joe Canfield and with, I believe, with Ray Bladine, that unless something extraordinary happens between now and the end of the year, the money that we are able to move from one category to another based on the latest okay from the governor's office telling us that it's appropriate to do so from the Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting, that we can move the money around for our own needs because it was a lump sum appropriation, that we have found a way to get to the end of the year with our expenditures, knowing that there will be some potentially deferred expenses that will be moved into the January and February needs request from an additional appropriation that we would go to the legislature in January to request. Is that a good summary, Mr. Canfield and Bladine?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sturts, I think that's a good summary. The only thing I would mention is that is certainly, and I think I characterize it as a likely scenario, but my only concern is that things could heat up very quickly. I mean, we could get a lengthy decision from the federal district court 3-judge panel tomorrow, or the plaintiffs in the Leach case, could file motions, and so there is always the possibility that the legal work could increase significantly in the next 3 months. But what you summarized is a possible scenario if things sort of continued on the status quo, and it's my only concern is just the unknowns that come with when you have 3 active lawsuits, that any one of them could erupt with a lot of legal work at any moment.
Okay, Madam Chair, let's just follow up on that. If let's say 1, 2, or 3 all erupt, and we know that there's going to be a massive need for costs, that sort of extraordinary condition, in my opinion, would be a legitimate reason to request the governor to call a special session for bringing appropriations, because it is the legislature's constitutional requirement to make appropriations by a majority vote to fund this commission's needs, including defense of these lawsuits. But as it stands right now, we'd be asking for 90 people to come back and their staffs to come back for a vote on something that we're not sure, but we just want to make sure that if it happens, you follow what I'm saying?
Commissioner Sturts, is that directed to me to try to answer?
Sure, please.
I think that as Christina and I tried to pull together this report and be as fair and balanced as we could about what can we do and what couldn't we do, our goal was to comply, and she mentioned it, with the state law that says when you know you've got a budget problem, you've got to try to take every action you can to stay within your appropriation. And that's what the spreadsheet we developed shows you. It anticipates 2 things with regard to the legal. Is One, we don't spend more than $100,000 a month on legal expenses, and that's clearly a possibility. So to that extent, that would take care of October, November. It would show then for December activity, we'd have about $59,000 that we could spend in January for December billing. Will we need $100,000 in December? I don't know. Could we find a few more dollars as we get closer to December? Yes, that's a possibility. So that's what we struggle with, because on the one side, if you ask, do we have an adequate appropriation? Well, right now, I guess we do, but tomorrow we may not. Clearly, there is the possibility, and that's what we've tried to do, was to get us to January. At this point, we're maybe a little short of doing that, but it's all based on our best projections, and I can't tell you that that we're 100% accurate. So your earlier comment, is it possible to make it to January? I'd say yes, it is. But I guess that's all I have to say on it.
Well, Madam Chair, as a follow-up to that, here's my bigger, broader statement. I know that we'll talk about the specifics and get legal recommendations in executive session, but let's just play this out. Let's say that the commission decides that we're going to sue the legislature, and then we're going to have some reason to compel these folks to come back. We're going to bring 90 folks back here in the next 45 days between now and the holiday season to come back to give us an appropriation on something that we may or may not need to get to January. How do you think January is going to turn out? In other words, if we could find a way to have an event take place that would require the recalling back of the, I think that, listen, my crystal ball is broken, but I would believe that the leadership, as well as the governor's office, would have an understanding that if all three cases hammered down on next Monday morning and we needed to throw $250,000 a week of resources at this, or whatever the number would need to be, that they would understand that we can't make a legal allocation to engage our legal team to defend these lawsuits without the appropriation being put in place. So something extraordinary, I think that they would understand why we would want to request the governor to call back the legislature for this appropriation. If we're going to sue them to try to force them to come back on what we think may happen or might possibly happen because we're not quite sure, even though we've got enough money that we've already shown on a document that's being presented in public session that we can make it to the end of the year without something extraordinary happen, I would be hard-pressed to find favor that would make good, prudent sense.
Madam Chair, it's Scott Freeman.
Mr. Freeman?
Well, if the commission were to decide to institute a special action, then I think we're all in, because now we're diverting resources to the prosecution of this lawsuit. Has anyone done an estimate, prepared a budget as to how much it would cost to file a special action and take it up to the Supreme Court, get an order, and follow through on the relief, whatever relief is ordered? What time frame, how quickly that could be expected to be accomplished? Because I think once we go down that road, we're committed. There's no way we're making it to January, because now we're funding this this third lawsuit, I guess, brought by the commission.
Madam Chair, I can't answer the whole question there, but I think that in the discussions I've had with legal counsel, that if we were to file some action, the chances of us to get any decision before January is very unlikely. I do recall we had talked last time we needed to do this about some possible budget costs, but we have not really addressed those in terms of whether that's realistic, and I'd have to ask the attorneys to talk to it. But yes, the problem is that we would have to reallocate resources to file that lawsuit, and we could only do that with your direction, of course.
Okay, any other comments? comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. Was there anything else? Have we essentially covered everything in agenda item 3 as well with regard to leach discovery requests?
Madam Chair, I don't believe so. I think that there was a need for a discussion on that with the attorneys on leach in executive session.
Okay, so there's nothing in public that we want to talk about now on number 3?
I think that's correct. Both attorneys are shaking their heads no, so.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to obtain legal advice on both agenda items 3 and 4.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So I've heard 2 ayes.
Madam Chair, was there a second to the motion?
I thought there was.
There was.
Is that Commissioner Callan? I can't hear you.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Callan. I second the motion.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, he said.
So I think I've heard 4 ayes. Any opposed? Okay, just for the record, can we, because I can't tell who voted aye, can you state your name and who said aye?
McNulty, aye.
Stir fry.
Callan, aye.
Mathis, aye. And I guess, is Commissioner Freeman, are you abstaining or voting no?
I'm voting no.
Okay. So we'll, the motion carries. We'll go ahead and go into executive session, which means we'll have to exit out of public session, which means, unfortunately, the folks in the room and on the call that are not commissioners need to depart, and hopefully we'll come out soon and continue in public session. But the time right now is 3:09. The time is 4:52 p.m. and we'll enter back into public session. Do we still have members of the public with us?
No.
You scared them off. All right. So, do any commissioners have any comments coming out of executive session that they'd like to state?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Sturts?
I'd like to, if there's no comments, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'd like to move that the Commission does not enter into litigation against the legislature or its funding source. And we do not at this time authorize our legal counsel to prepare for such, pending a significant event, at which time we would make special requests of the legislature and the governor's office to recognize their constitutional requirement to fund the commission to defend its maps.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
Madam
I
Chair,
was just saying, I was a Girl Scout, and I think you have to be prepared. So I guess I wouldn't support directing our council not to prepare, but
Madam Chair, it's Scott Freeman.
Mr. Freeman?
I'm thinking maybe it just behooves us to sort of target, and depending upon comments from staff and council, just maybe we should just sort of tentatively plan at this point to be convening in mid-December as a status check, or perhaps earlier if there's some change in circumstance, then we would need to, nobody leave the country. Just don't do it the week after Thanksgiving because I'll be on my hunt. But that's where I think we should go at this point, and I don't see a reason to direct council to take any affirmative action with respect to the funding at this time.
Any other thoughts?
This is Linda. I like Commissioner Freeman's idea of being prepared to have a meeting in December. And otherwise, I think council should proceed as we discussed in executive session, which is to say they don't need any particular direction one way or the other.
Okay, so we have a seconded motion on the floor that we need to vote on unless there's other discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Any opposed?
This is Linda. I vote no.
And Commissioner Callan, are you?
Yes, I'm still here. I
Okay.
voted aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. You voted aye?
Yes.
So we have 3 ayes and 1 no. Is that correct?
Sounds right.
Okay, and I'll vote no too, just because I just think I agree with Commissioner Freeman's statement that we just plan to meet in December, but I don't want to say that we would, not enter into litigation. I think it's incumbent upon the commission to defend the maps as necessary, and if there's a need to do so that comes up before January, then we're going to need to be able to rise to the occasion. So, but the motion carries 3-2. So that's how the cookie crumbles.
The fact that this is, Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Callan.
Go ahead, Commissioner Callan.
I believe that the fact that at least with these instructions for council, I don't think that in any way it precludes from, if there were a significant event, that we reconvene and be able to change our decision if necessary. But it just, again, I think we can still meet, and I don't see why that would restrict it in any way.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay, any other direction coming out of executive session? Okay, I'm not hearing any. So, it sounds like we will, no one leaves the country, at least in December, and be available in case we need to meet again. And I will just say, one thing I wanted to say about our court reporter, too, before we adjourn. Marty Herter was recently named president of Arizona Litigation Support Court Reporters, and I just wanted to congratulate him. I'm sure the other commissioners echo that. And other than that, thank you, everyone, for your time. It's now 5 p.m. on the nose, so we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and congratulations.